You can buy a house in Detroit for $500. That's not a rumor. That's how the system actually works. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly why that price exists, what happens to the people who take the deal, and why the real cost of a $500 house in Detroit is closer to $100,000. Because here's what nobody tells you when they write the headline. The house is $500. The situation attached to the house is not $500. And the gap between those two numbers has destroyed more financial lives than most people realize. Here are 10 American cities where homes sell for under $100,000. Each one has a reason. Each reason is more specific and more dangerous than the listing suggests. Detroit, Michigan. Let's answer the obvious question first. How does a house in an American city cost $500? Michigan state law requires foreclosure on any property with 3 years of unpaid property taxes. When a homeowner falls behind and cannot catch up, the county seizes the property and puts it in a tax foreclosure auction. The auction runs in 2 rounds. In round 1, properties sell for the amount of back taxes owed. In round 2, for everything that did not sell in round 1, the opening bid drops to $500. Half of the properties in Wayne County's auction some years do not sell even at that price. The Detroit Land Bank Authority, the city agency that collects whatever the auction does not sell, ends up with roughly 90,000 properties. It then resells them through its Own It Now program, starting at $1,000. That's how a house in Detroit costs $500. Someone could not pay their property taxes. The county took it. Nobody wanted it at auction. Now, it can be yours for $1,000. Here is what comes with it. The property is sold as is. The land bank describes these homes as extremely blighted. Pretty much anything that makes the house habitable has been stripped before it reaches the buyer. The wiring, the copper pipes, sometimes the drywall. You have 6 months from purchase to bring it to habitable condition, a functioning kitchen, bathroom, furnace, water heater, and active utilities. Miss the deadline, and the land bank takes it back. While you are doing renovations, you are also paying property taxes. Detroit's millage rate is among the highest in Michigan, and Michigan already runs well above the national average. On a $50,000 home, that can be close to $3,000 per year. Half of all Own It Now buyers between 2015 and 2021 fell behind on their taxes while trying to finish their renovations. And this is before the deeper history. Between 2010 and 2016, Detroit illegally overtaxed homeowners by an estimated $600 million, assessing properties at up to 85% of market value, violating the state constitution's 50% cap. Roughly 100,000 homeowners, the vast majority of them black, lost their homes to tax foreclosure as a result of bills that were inflated by law. The city has acknowledged this. Nobody has been compensated. In the 3 years from 2014 to 2016, Detroit homeowners lost property worth an estimated $300 million in current market value. That wealth now sits in the portfolios of out-of-city investors who bought at auction for an average of $5,500 per property and resold for an average of $53,000. The $500 house exists because a system extracted wealth from the people who used to own it. That context does not appear on the listing. Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown's population peaked at 170,000 in 1930. It is now 60,000. Steel left, and population followed. What did not follow was the infrastructure. Roads, water mains, sewer lines, schools, all built for 170,000 people, and all maintained by a tax base of 60,000. Homes in Youngstown sell for under $50,000. Some sell for under $20,000. The problem is not the price. The problem is what surrounds the price. Vacancy rates above 30% in many neighborhoods mean that buying cheap here means buying into a block where a third of the properties are empty, not maintained, and potentially dangerous to adjacent values. Youngstown is doing something honest with this problem. City planners have stopped chasing growth that is not coming and have started planning for a smaller city. Right-sizing means accepting fewer people and making what remains livable. That is the correct strategy. It does not make the $30,000 house a straightforward investment. Flint's median home price is under $70,000. Flint also has 11,000 vacant homes, roughly 1 in 5 residential properties empty. The water crisis is the obvious reason nobody moves here. In 2014, Flint switched water sources as a cost-cutting measure. The pipes corroded. Lead leached into the supply for approximately 2 years before it was publicly acknowledged. Between 6,000 and 12,000 children were exposed to elevated lead levels. Here's what is less discussed. The city has replaced most lead service lines. The current water tests safe. But the people who lived through Flint being told the water was safe while it was poisoning their children do not simply accept the next announcement. That is not irrational. That is the rational response to having been lied to by institutions with authority over your family's health. The trust problem has a direct housing consequence. Flint has adequate stock at prices that should attract buyers. It is not attracting those buyers. The water crisis created a permanent reputational discount. There is also a second problem nobody mentions. The lead exposure that happened to Flint's children will show up in the data for decades, in educational outcomes, employment rates, and the long-term economic trajectory of the generation that was poisoned. That is not speculation. That is how lead exposure works. Before you buy property in Flint, you are also betting on the long-term trajectory of that generation. Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson is Mississippi's capital, population 150,000, median home price around $95,000. It still has a functioning downtown, hospitals, and universities. Jackson also has a water system that failed in 2022, and it has never fully recovered. After a winter storm, the treatment plants lost function. Nearly 180,000 people went without running water for weeks. The storm did not cause the failure. The storm only triggered it. The cause was decades of deferred infrastructure maintenance in a majority black capital city that received inadequate state investment for a long time. The pipes were already compromised. The storm just made that visible. As of 2026, Jackson's water system remains under federal oversight. The EPA and the Department of Justice are involved in oversight proceedings. There are ongoing questions about pipe integrity, water pressure, and the long-term financial sustainability of repairs. You can buy a house in Jackson for under $100,000. The question you need to answer first is whether the city's infrastructure will be reliably maintained for the length of your mortgage. Nobody can currently answer that with confidence. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's median home price is around $125,000, but there is significant inventory well below $100,000, particularly on the east side. Here is what's different about Cleveland compared to the other cities on this list. There are specific neighborhoods in Cleveland where the revival is real: Ohio City, Tremont, and downtown. The Cleveland Clinic makes Cleveland a genuine healthcare hub. The tech sector is small and growing. But that revival is geographically concentrated. 2 miles from a neighborhood where homes sell for $400,000, you can find a street where 30% of properties are vacant and the $60,000 house has been sitting for 8 months. The price alone tells you nothing about which situation you are in. Cleveland requires more research per dollar spent than almost any market in the country because the variance between the best and worst blocks is extraordinary. The cheapest houses are not the best opportunity. They are the ones where the revival has not arrived, and there is no guarantee it will. Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham's cheapest neighborhoods have homes well under $80,000. Alabama has the lowest property tax rate in the country, around 0.41%. On a $75,000 home, that's under $310 per year. That is a genuine structural advantage that most other cities on this list cannot offer. The disadvantage is jobs. The steel industry that built Birmingham is gone. The University of Alabama at Birmingham is the city's largest employer now, a healthcare and education economy that is growing but unevenly distributed. The metropolitan area around Birmingham is growing. The city proper is not. Surrounding municipalities have been incorporating specifically to capture tax revenue from new development, leaving the city itself with a smaller share of regional economic growth than geography would suggest. The cheapest house in Birmingham is cheap because it is in a neighborhood the metropolitan growth has not reached. The question is whether it will reach that specific neighborhood within your ownership horizon. In some areas, the answer looks possible. In others, there is no evidence it will. Gary was built by U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel no longer needs Gary. Population declined from 178,000 to 70,000. The tax base collapsed. The schools fell apart. Infrastructure aged without adequate repair. You can buy a house in Gary for under $50,000. Property insurance will be expensive and hard to get. The property tax bill will be significant relative to the home's value. Your surrounding block will have a high percentage of vacant properties. The City Methodist Church, a Gothic ruin being slowly consumed by vegetation in the middle of a functioning city, is visible from multiple neighborhoods. It has been abandoned since 1975. No one has torn it down. No one has restored it. It just sits there. That image is not a metaphor. It is Gary's actual condition in 2026. Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is the only city on this list where the cheap housing problem is directly connected to the insurance problem. In high-crime neighborhoods of Memphis, where homes sell well under $100,000, property insurance is expensive relative to the home's value. Lenders are increasingly reluctant to write conventional mortgages on properties in certain Memphis zip codes. That means buyers need cash, or they are limited to specialty loan products at higher rates. A $70,000 house in a Memphis neighborhood with high crime and high vacancy might require $5,000 per year in insurance, carry a mortgage rate 2 percentage points above the national average if you can finance it at all, and depreciate if the neighborhood continues to lose population. Memphis has a 27% child poverty rate in its metro area. That number does not directly affect your property value. It shapes the trajectory of the local economy, the school system, and the long-term demand for housing in that neighborhood. It is part of the calculation. East St. Louis, Illinois. Homes. In East St. Louis sell for $20,000. Some sell for $10,000. Per capita income is approximately $14,000 per year. Poverty rate is above 40%. Vacancy is so high that entire blocks have more empty lots than occupied properties. This entry is short because the structural situation in East St. Louis has been deteriorating for 60 years with no evidence that the trajectory is changing. A house is not a good investment in a city that is functionally shrinking. It might be a home. It is not an asset that will grow. Granite City, Illinois. Granite City is the entry on this list that most closely resembles an actual opportunity. It sits across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. The projected median home price in 2026 is under $85,000. Steel left here too. Vacancy is elevated. Crime is above the national average, and the school district has challenges. But the proximity to St. Louis is real and measurable. Employment in the St. Louis metropolitan area is accessible from Granite City in a way it is not from Gary or East St. Louis. The cost gap between living in Missouri and living across the river in Granite City is large enough that it is starting to attract buyers. Granite City is the closest thing on this list to genuine arbitrage. It is cheap for structural reasons that are slowly being eroded by proximity to a recovering metropolitan economy. The word slowly matters. This is a long-term bet with real uncertainty. So, back to the beginning. Why can you buy a house in Detroit for $500? Because Michigan law mandates that any property with 3 years of unpaid taxes goes to auction. Because the properties that do not sell in round 1 of that auction go to round 2 at $500. Because the Detroit Land Bank Authority inherits everything that does not sell at $500. And because the land bank then sells those properties to anyone willing to renovate them. The price is the result of a system that has been foreclosing on Detroit homeowners at one of the highest rates in American history. More than 150,000 properties foreclosed in the last 20 years. And 1 in 3 private properties in the city. The $500 is not a bargain. It is the residue of a decades-long process of displacement. Now you know exactly what you would be buying into. Whether that changes your decision is up to you.